Welcome to a new episode of Outside the Panels with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to an episode of Outside the Panels. I'm your host, Johnny Machine Hughes, and as you know, I scurry the internet for fantastic comic books and creators to speak to. Tonight is no different, as I have the ultra talented Michael Dolce of Sire Studios. Michael, how's it going?
How's it going? I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
You are more than welcome. You, sir, are a bit of a comic book. What's the word I'm looking? Veteran, is that the right word? You come from many line of comic.
Believe it or not, yeah, believe it or not, 20 years in this business now. It's crazy. Starting all the way back, self-publishing, and then ended up at Wizard Magazine when that was a thing, and you know, Image, Zenescope. Been definitely. I've had a nice career and no signs of slowing down, so that's a good thing.
Good call, man. So self-publishing 20 years ago, that must have looked dramatically different to how it looks now, right?
Oh, man. You know what? I talk to all my friends in the business these days, and we really talk about, like, man, how amazing would it have been to have started maybe 10 years ago versus 20 years ago, where there was no Kickstarter. Your only avenue was Diamond. You know, you didn't have social media to promote yourself. The only thing, I got the most bang for my buck getting ads in the back of Wizard, which I'd worked for the company then, and they used to actually ask, employees, they're like, do you have any extra, do you have anything you want to promote? Because we have extra ad space. They might not sell anything that month. And that was like the only way people kind of knew anything about, my comics and what I was doing. So yeah, it's a completely different landscape. In some ways, I miss it because I grew up on the traditional model, of being in stores, and that's it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I mean, it's so exciting what the world is right now and what the comic book world is right now.
It's strange, 20 years when you think about it. I mean, so that's 2003. I mean, at 2003, Image had been going for what, 10 years, something like that. So the I suppose the iron hold of the big two had firmly been broken by that point. There was no more just Marvel DC. I mean, there's always been a plethora of dark horses and stuff like that, but Image were the ones that kind of broke the scene.
Image is it's funny though, right? I mean, the early 90s. I mean, I love the early 90s. I mean, that's I was a kid back in the early 90s. That's the comics I grew up on. All the Lee and the Liefeld and Valentino and Larson and like the Image founders. I mean, I got into, like, the X-Men books were my gateway drug into all that stuff, and and that's kind of what I grew up on. But Image was really interesting back then because they had hit a real lull by the late 90s, and then and even the early 2000s. It wasn't until like Red Star, Christian Gossett's Red Star, where all of a sudden Image started to get back, and became this independent station. Because if you remember, early Image was all just kind of like clones of what these guys were doing at Marvel. Not in a bad way. Just,
no. I mean, Cyberforce, Wildcats, Youngblood.
Anybody who was anybody who did an X-Men book at Marvel wanted to do an Image book that was like their X-Men book, or like X-Force, or whatever the case is. And with the exception of maybe Spawn and Savage Dragon, which were kind of unique creations. But so the time you're talking about in 01 and to 03, Image became the non-superhero power, publisher to go to. That's really where they seem to really make a mark. And but the Marvel and DC I grew up with was still there. It was still, it was Dan DiDio running the show, and it was Joe Quesada getting promoted and becoming editor-in-chief, and Bendis kind of coming out. I mean, as much as I love the early 90s, I got to tell you, the 2000s were a great time to be a Marvel and DC fan also.
Yeah, the way I kind of look at it from that point of view, I suppose, is that the early Image years was art over story. Simplistic view, maybe, right?
Yeah, no.
by the time everybody caught up and said, well, hold on a second, it looks great, but it reads terrible.
Yeah.
Then the big two had managed to switch it back around with some really good writing, and the art
Yes.
had caught up as well. So then Image were kind of like, holy crap, our
Yep.
USP's gone. And that ended up, when people talk about Image nowadays, some people don't even talk about Spawn and Youngblood and Wildcat.
No.
They're all about The Walking Dead.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, look, that's why they made him a partner, right? In the business, because yeah, he did something between that and Invincible, right? That actually,
Yes.
kind of resurrected Image. Red Star, I think, was the first thing that kind of caught attention, but then Kirkman's run on Image is what that's the Image we know today.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. It's interesting because that 90s vibe is all through your book, right?
Absolutely.
That 90s vibe. So let's talk a little bit about your book. What's your book? It's a trade paperback, so it's called Sire Origins. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so the Sire is about a superhero. He's forced by his own costume to fight evil, kind of like having a spider sense, but instead of warning of danger, actually puts him in danger. He doesn't know how he got it, doesn't know why it's making him do what it does, and worst of all is he can't get the costume off. So he's kind of forced into battling all these other superhumans that are cropping up all over the planet unexpectedly all at once. The series first debuted back in 2006. It was the Sire, and Sire Origins actually collects the first 3 issues plus new material plus never before seen material. We got the original artist back on it to do some more supplemental material that's coming to it, and it's the first of many installations, and it's a comeback. And I can't think of a better time than now when a couple different things are happening right now that makes it just the right time for this book to come back. And it's 90s nostalgia is everywhere, so that's a great thing. And this is a love letter to those Marvel and DC books that I grew up, loving. More Marvel than DC, but I definitely had a few, in my collection back then. And 2, I think people are getting a little sick of what Marvel and DC are kind of putting out. It's the same, it's the same recycled stuff. It's the same recycled, heroes and villains. Nobody dies and stays dead anymore. And I think
damn you, Jean Grey, damn you to hell. That's
well,
all your fault.
Now it's damn you, Jonathan Hickman, because he basically he's got that whole thing going on where basically the X-Men can't die.
Yeah, tell me about it. What's the point?
Yeah, exactly. So it's this is more along the lines of it's a one straightforward narrative. It's one straightforward story, and there are consequences that's going to happen. But it's got that vibe, like you said. It's got the 90s vibe. A lot happens. I know it says 3 issues, but my God, like I remember back in the 2000s when books would come out and it would take 5 issues for like the character to leave his apartment or something. You know what I mean? And so that is definitely the opposite of what you're going to find here. It's a fast-moving story. It's part of a larger story. The cool thing about this character and this book, and I'll get into the origins of it in a little bit, but it has been continued on. So I've actually, the first 6 issues were actually in stores back between 2006 and 2008. And then, I kind of moved on to some other things. I moved on to doing some book. I did some stuff at Image called a book called M Theory. And I co-created a book called Descendant at Image. And I was doing some Zenoscope stuff. But people kept asking me, they're like, oh, is the story going to continue? And I said, well, yeah, I got a huge story. I ended it at issue 6 to a point where I'm like, all right, if the story ended now, I can whatever. But people would come up to me in conventions. It kept being my best-selling book at conventions. It kept being the one that people kept asking, when's the next one coming out? And so in 2012, I did just that. I picked the book up with issue 7, and we literally just kickstarted the what will be the 3rd volume trade paperback on Kickstarter, and finally all the backers are getting their copies. So we have 13 issues. Spoiler alert, issue 13 ends on a cliffhanger, so we're going to keep going. I mean, I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 100 issues, of story to tell in this series. Wow. And so, like I said, it just a lot of things kind of came together. My partnership with Dren Productions, Dren and I, Dren's founder, James Massia, and I went to college. We've been partnering at comic conventions for years now. and it just made sense to just move the book over there because his publishing line is just doing so many great things right now, and yeah, so like I'm so excited because I created this character when I was in 6th grade, and I literally drew 100 small books like folded together, and
I love because that's what I do. I'm not killing me.
oh man, I mean, I actually have them somewhere in my office too. I should have pulled them out for the interview. I'll have to remember that next time. But it was a character that I basically grew up and I kept with it. 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, all through high school, and right around high school, I kind of started. Obviously, I was maturing and getting older, and started thinking about like, all right, what's the real way I can start telling this story? And I kind of I kind of pivoted, what I was doing with the character to align more with what you see now in the Sire, and like I said, 100 issues later, I finished the last one when I graduated college, and I look back and I reread it and I go, there's a really epic, cosmic space superhero storyline here that I think people are going to really go for, and you know what? Like I said, at conventions, man, I still get asked all the time, when's the next one coming out? And I really got to do that. I got to keep going.
keep the fans happy. What was it like? So you've worked on the book for on and off in 6th grade. Then you start to get the idea. Well, you know what? We're going to kick it off again. We're going to start with issue 7.
Yeah.
Rather than reboot, which is great.
Yep.
What was it like putting in that old comfy pair of slippers? Did it take some getting used to, or was it like, man, it's like I've never left?
Oh, this character is like the brother I never had. So, I mean, it really is. It's part brother, part me, part.
Yeah.
It's its own character, though. I mean, that's the kind of cool part about this, and it's always been that way. You have something good. I'm a comic book writer now. I write for a company called Rogue Matter. I have a book through Dren Productions, and I've got a couple other things in the hopper as well too, down the line with some different companies as well too. You've got something when the character just writes themselves. That when everything just writes itself, it's just stress free. It's just fun. It's like, oh nope, that's it. It's they speak to me, and I don't have to make it speak. And I'm writing some scripts right now where, to get the feel for the characters to the point where they just they start talking in their own distinct voice. Doesn't happen overnight. With Sire, it never ends. Like it's just easy. It's an easy character, and he's kind of, again, it's my take on superheroes while also engaging in a traditional superhero story, because I always thought to myself, I'm like, if I had superpowers, I'd be on TV. I wouldn't be going on patrol, and the characters thinking the exact same thing, but the costume's like, no,
you're Spider-Man before Uncle Ben got killed, right?
Right. But that would be me. But the costume is basically saying, no, you have to go out there. You have to. There's a greater purpose for why we're making you do this. And by the end of the first trade, which is what I sent you, Sire Origins, which is in stores, by the way, June 28th, 2023. So go order it now. Actually, order it now from your local retailer. That's the key.
In fact, if you give me 2 seconds, if you're going to order it. It's in previews on Previews World. The code that you are looking for is APR, that's Alpha Papa Romeo 231404. I'll repeat that later on in the pod.
Appreciate it. Yeah. So by the time this one ends, he's going to start getting a little bit more comfortable in his own skin, in his own costume. He's going to understand there's a greater purpose to what's happening, and it's going to be a launching pad going forward for future issues. So it's and they will be coming. Every quarter we're going to be releasing a new trade. Well into 2024. Meanwhile, I'll be kickstarting the next story arc as well sometime later this year.
Having read the book, there are several influences in play a little bit, and that, I don't mind that, because so was it Harrison Ford said there's only seven types of stories you can do?
Yeah. I think it's actually Mark Twain quote, isn't it? Like, I think that's going way back in the day.
So I heard it from, well, I didn't hear it, I read it from Harrison Ford.
Yeah, sure.
So let's get some of these influences out of the way. The ones that I kind of spotted, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. Straight up, the look with these little eye things, I was thinking, oh, he's got some Green Lantern going on, a little bit of Nightwing, the Chuck Dixon book Scott
Yeah.
McDaniel back then has that kind of thing. A bit of Venom, because obviously the costume is it alive? Is it not alive?
Right.
Bit
Yeah.
of Superman, because he's got his girl pal there.
Yeah.
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 Here's an odd one for you. You ready?
I'm all ears.
Captain Britain.
That is an interesting one.
I'll explain.
Yeah, please. I loved Excalibur back in the day. So go ahead.
So back when Captain Britain started,
Mm-hmm.
poor Brian Braddock got chased around the moors, and he ended up falling into this like Stonehenge type place. And
Yep.
he had a choice: he could take the amulet of peace or the sword of power. And of course, he took the amulet, and that turned
Sure.
into Captain Britain and so on. As I'm reading this book, towards certain aspects, the guy has to make a choice.
Yes.
And he's like, and that's what got me. I was like, oh, yes, it's a choice. And from that point, I was kind of like, yeah. I thought I'd just throw Captain Britain in there because I can.
Hey, look, I will never
maybe
turn
not
down
as obvious as
Britain
some, but
reference. I will never turn down a Captain Britain reference.
yeah, the Alan Davis stuff is gorgeous. So
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So I was surprised why Alan Davis never went to Image and did something, but
yeah. You know what? I mean, you know what? He still gets gigs now, so maybe that's it. You know, as long as you're working.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the Image creators earlier. Jim Valentino always struck me as the odd person out, because back then, Guardians of the Galaxy wasn't like top tier at all.
Right.
It was nowhere near the Guardians that we expect now in
Right.
The MCU. So, but hey, fair play to him.
Jim.
Absolutely.
So I worked. My two comics that came out through Image was through the Shadowline brand.
Oh,
so
cool.
I got to work, hand in hand with Jim. And from my understanding too, is that he was kind of the, he was the guy everyone else looked up to in the group, because he was a bit older and he was more experienced. He'd been doing it for longer.
Okay.
And so I think I agree with you in terms of art style and in terms of popularity. Yeah, he was kind of the odd person out, but at the same time, I guess, being an entrepreneur, because that's what every comic book creator who does independent comics is.
Yep.
You need someone that has the business sense. James and I at Dren, James is the engine that drives Dren. But there are things he's like, no, you can you talk to these people? Can you do this? Because you just do that better. And I think that's what Jim, Valentino, like James would hate being on a podcast. He does not want to be on a podcast. He doesn't like it. He'll do it, but he hates it. I have no problem talking to people. I'll talk to any. I'll talk to I'll talk to the wall. I'll talk to your painting behind you. So
really?
maybe that's
the other way. Really?
Maybe that's what.
Yeah.
Will they talk back? I don't know, but
well, no, probably not. There's a good. There's someone who's there's a lift in there from somewhere. My wife bought me. Hey ho. So for me, Jim Valentino kind of added a level of respectability, because you think like the image crowd, him, Jim Lee, and Silvestri, I think were like the kind of more sit back thinker types, where you've got McFarlane, Larson, and Liefeld are all the POW guys. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that's how I always interpret it. Anyway,
so funny anecdote, and this would have to be my number one career highlight. And I hope there's more like this, but right now, right to date, this is the best. And quite frankly, if I go to my grave tomorrow, it's a great highlight. My Image book Descendant came out in 2009, and they were doing the Image United press tour or whatever. And so, way back when I was in 5th grade, I waited outside my local comic book store to get autographs from Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and Eric Larson, and my dad, thank God, still with us, but he stood outside. It was cold. It was January. It was snowing. It didn't matter. There were lines around the block for them back in, I think it was like 91. And, fast forward to 18 years later, I'm at San Diego Comic-Con, and they're doing Image United. So my book is coming out at the same time. So my table space was Jim Valentino's table space. And I'm signing copies of my book next to all these guys that I used to wait in line. I waited in line 3 hours to get their autograph. And so, I was a little younger back then, so I definitely was a little more, I had not more confidence. I just didn't give as much. I didn't care as much. So I was the loud one at that table
Yeah.
for the hour I was allowed to be there. I was like, everyone's coming to see my book. Everyone's coming here to see mine. They don't want these guys. But meanwhile, inside, I'm like, oh man, this is like, like I died and went to nerd heaven, and like I said, my 10-year-old self would have given me the big thumbs up for where I was at that point.
I think the motto, the kind of the emotion of the story is that this, when you get in the end zone, pretend you've been there before.
Yeah,
right?
exactly, right, exactly.
Don't be giving it all like the fancy dances, just like give the ball to the ref, go on and carry on.
Exactly. No, I was doing the fancy dance. There's no question. I was definitely doing the fancy dance then. But inside, I said, but yeah, it was cool.
Cool. Let's have a look at some art. So
yeah,
not the greatest start for our hero. He's taking a load off.
Yeah. Well, that's when he first gets his costume. Dan Leister did the pencils. I did the coloring. That was back in the day. That's what you had to do. I mean, you basically, as an independent creator, you wear as many hats as possible. I did the lettering, I did the coloring. I've learned a great deal more in all those areas now, but at the same time, we've remastered it so it looks bright and beautiful. If anybody had bought the first issue, it looked all faded because I didn't know the difference between RGB and CMYK, and it's these little growing pains that you pick up. But Dan, he's gone on to do stuff for Zenoscope. He was the Return to Wonderland artist. He was Hack Slash at Image.
I've seen his work then, Hack Slash.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And he and I just became great friends over this. We that whole 2006, 2007. I mean, we basically toured the country together, and any show we could go to, we would. And that's going back to that thing of, man, if we had started a little later, I mean, the advantages. There's a Comic-Con like every weekend now, and it's the most amazing thing, or at least pre-COVID, right? There was a Comic-Con every single weekend, whereas back then, I mean, we really only you had your hotel shows, you had your like little church shows and things like that, or your flea markets. But the major shows, the major Comic-Cons that we're all just used to from the 2010s, it was Wizard World Chicago, it was San Diego. There wasn't even a New York at that point,
Expo at Chicago, maybe? Was that still a thing?
Yeah, that's it. That's all there was. Yeah, there was Wizard World Chicago. I mean, at that point, Wizard World Texas was a thing. Thank goodness. That was one of my favorite shows. Wizard World did an LA show in 2008, but I mean, you were looking at maybe, you had Baltimore Heroes Con, Pittsburgh Con was always a big one, and Motor City. You're looking at 10 major shows for the entire 365 days. Now, I mean, with Fan Expo, and previously Wizard World, I mean, you could be at a show every week. I know some creators, Dirk Manning. I don't know if you've heard of him before, but that guy has built up his own independent. He's with Source Point Press, and
the Source Point.
Yeah, well, he's like one of their major guys, and he and I knew each other back. He did some stuff at Image at the same time I did, but he basically built his fan base up by going to shows like every single week. And I mean, more power to him, man. I don't know how. I could live out of a suitcase in a little bit, but not what he could do.
I hear Boston tends to have a whole load of cons, and Joe St. Pierre's always at a con. He loves the cons, as good old Joe. Good guy.
No,
right, before we get into some more Sire artwork and some more pages, here's an advert for one of our other shows. We're talking about 90s books, so there's only one place to go for that. The Old Timers.
Do you want to find out what makes the professor do his happy dance? Check out the Old Timers Comic Book Show, only on the UCPN.
There you go, the Old Timers Comic Book Show, where the hosts aren't old, but the comics most certainly are. And that includes all of those books up into, if not and before, 1998. So a ton of Image stuff gets mentioned, as well as some of those classic Marvel and DC books.
That blows my mind that it's now. I mean, we're considered classic rock now, right? Like that's that's kind of what we're into this era now. I mean, it blows my mind. 98 to me is like yesterday. I don't know.
Tell me about it. But when we started doing Old Timers, we had to pick a point, and I said, right, let's go 25 years, and then now it's like 1998. I'm like, dude, that doesn't
Well,
feel
that's the
like
thing when you
25
say
years.
25 years, that sounds old. It sounds like a long
Yeah,
time
yeah.
ago, but it doesn't. That does not feel like 25 years ago.
No,
I don't know.
no.
25 years ago in 1998 felt like really like a lifetime ago. Like the 60s compared to the 90s, it's complete. Like it's like night and day. The 90s compared to now, honestly, I don't know. I feel like it all just blends into one timeline there. I don't
You
know.
think? I'd say I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Storytelling. We talked about the Image indie implosion, like the true indie experiment, rather than the superhero stuff.
Yeah.
Other than coloring and probably lettering, I think comics have stayed pretty consistent for the last 25 years.
I'd say so.
Coloring has become much more expressive. You can get lots of great tones and touches and nuances on digital colors now. Lettering has become such a thing. I mean, people like Taylor Esposito, who does a lot of stuff at Ghostcliff, Zenoscope.
Yeah, no, Taylor lettered Plan 59, one of the books I did through Dren.
Yeah, I've interviewed
And
Taylor.
he's actually lettering another book. Oh, he's awesome. Yeah, and he's super professional, super great letterer, and he'll be lettering a book I'm doing through a company I work for called Rogue Matter.
Cool.
It's called The Road's Not Taken. It'll be out later this year.
Cool. But I mean, the superstars now, isn't there? I mean, Georgie Belair on colors, for example, Clayton Cowles.
Yeah.
These are names now that people go, wow, it's Clayton Cowles. Yeah. You know, like 20 years ago, you'd be like, yeah, it's some dude that wrote the letters, some guy who's sitting in an office somewhere, just, that's all he does. But now it's a thing. It's like,
Peter Steigerwald, I feel like he was the guy that really introduced, because you had like the Brian Stelfreeze and the Joe Jusko, which those were amazing color, but they weren't colorists. They were like painters, right? Whereas Peter was the first, like, I feel like digital artist, like digital colorist that, and if you ever saw like the sketches from Mike Turner, like his Flash cover, I mean, a lot of it, and Mike Turner got, rest in peace, he was an amazing talent too, but a lot of his stuff, you give that to another colorist, it's not the same. Peter elevated everything he did, in an amazing way.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Peter's work. That's good. It's classic. Stefan Siege of Sunstone.
Yeah,
he is by far up there, but obviously go check it out. But it's an adults only book. Sorry. So just before we get into the book, and we're going to look at the book for a little bit, I want to show something that one of the pages you sent across. We talk about 90s nostalgia, and when you think about 90s, you think of splash pages. I want to tip my hat a little bit here, because whilst there are splash pages in the book, you don't succumb to the idea that every page has to be a splash.
Oh yeah. No.
Check this page out. This is chocker full. You've got your three main panels going on, but look at the amount of dialogue that's on there and the camera angles. This is what I'm talking about. This is saying to readers, you have to pay attention. It's not just poster art, poster art.
Yep.
How was that your intent going forward? Be mindful of the failings of the 90s book, not just the success.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I agree. It's funny you bring that. You bring up all the pages with the dialogue. I might even, before this thing goes to press, go in and trim a little bit, because I feel like this is a little bit of my own inexperience showing, where some of what JJ kind of says, like, it's the show me, don't tell me stuff. It's like things are happening. So, the rule is always, anything that's said has to have some sort of importance. So there's never any throwaway dialogue. There's never any, there's never anything that doesn't at least keep moving the story along, along. And I was, this is one of my strengths as a writer, that I always found was that I did a good first person voice. And so, having Sire's caption box is kind of walking us through. I mean, again, this is when it first debuted was 2006. You didn't have as many, if you think about it, all of the 90s books we loved, those characters came out of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right? Even the 70s, right? Where
thought bubbles. That's what you need. You need some thought bubbles.
Yeah, I know. I was, again, little things like this where I was trying to mimic the style of the time too. I didn't want to seem outdated, right? Because there was a lot of those there was a lot of those throwback comics, like Untold Tales of Spider-Man or something, and it was drawn, in a 60s format. And I'm like, all right, it's cool and everything, but it's not going to catch on. Like I need to make sure it looks current and goes with the current styles too. But but yeah. So I mean, look, like I said, I want you to. It should take more than 5 minutes to read the comic. And it really should. I mean, I remember, again, what a different time where comics were all we had for entertainment. Comic books, magazines, CDs, records. That was what we grew up. That was our form of entertainment. Our form of communication was calling people on the phone. I mean, maybe by the mid 2000s we had email and instant messenger maybe, but I wanted you to take time and feel like you got your money's worth, and to that I'm super proud of, and yes, very, very intentional to do that.
Cool, excellent. It's funny because I have this conversation with people all the time. People whinge at me saying, "Oh, people aren't going to the cinema anymore." It's like, why? Then the film's bad. I'm like, well, I'm not saying the films are particularly bad, but why would I go out and watch a new Marvel superhero movie at the cinema when I can just put on TV and watch Disney Plus? There's a reason why they stopped making Star Trek movies when the Star Trek shows were on telly, because nobody wanted to go and see the movies because you could just turn on the box and watch them, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's the same sort of principle, I guess, in that, back now we're spoiled for choice. You've got Star Wars at the cinema, you've got Star Wars on the TV, you've got Star Wars video games, Star Wars comic books. You've got, back then, you had, this is it. This was your batch of comic books. And that's what you've got. No bi-weekly schedule. Once a month, off you go.
Yeah.
And that was it. So
I mean, think about it too. I mean, there was a 14-year gap. No, actually, sorry. It was a 16-year gap between new Star Wars material that wasn't a cartoon. I mean, you had, Return of the Jedi comes out in 83, and then Phantom Menace doesn't come out till 99. That's a six. I mean, that's unheard of, right? I mean, that that was something when I was a kid. I was like, oh man, I loved the original trilogy, and it's like I'd love to see more Star Wars. I'd love to see more Star Wars, and used to get teased by it, but it never felt like it was going to happen. Now it's too much Star Wars. It's too much Marvel. It's too much all this stuff.
Yeah. Hands up if you're bored of the Mandalorian.
What's that?
There you go. Hands up if you're bored of the Mandalorian.
No, I'm actually not. It's the only one I'm not bored of.
I'm jumping off in the next couple of episodes. It's like if Grogu doesn't do something soon, I'm going to lose my temper. I'll just come to the dark side.
No, that's that's fine. I mean, but again, I wouldn't think we'd be bored of Mandalorian if we hadn't gotten, like Obi-Wan, which was okay, was not great.
Episodes 4 through 6 were great. Did you read that the episodes of Obi-Wan are supposed to reflect the story of the movies?
Oh, okay.
So episode 4, they have to go and rescue the princess. Episode 5, there's some train element. Episode 6, it's a big fight, and so and when you put it like that, it kind of makes sense. I just think, what was I going to say with Mandalorian? It's just, especially season, for me, and you were right. You're a creative guy, so you'll get this. I thought the season 2 finale for Mandalorian, no spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it, was absolutely spot on and finishes the story for Grogu and finishes the story for the Mandalorian.
Sure.
Then they've got to go back and contrive some reason.
Yes.
And now I'm sitting back there and I'm thinking to myself, there's no reason whatsoever. It was a perfect story. Right. It was a perfect end for those two characters.
I actually don't disagree with you in any way, shape, or form with that, because they really, I mean, they did. I mean, there was no other reason. The only thing I thought Mandalorian, the only hiccup in Mandalorian, and I really stood out, was the fact that we got half a season in the Book of Boba Fett. That was like, that was strange to me. I said, and my friend who's a Star Wars, aficionado, he's like, look, it's called Star Wars. It's one big story. I'm like, yeah, but it was called the Book of Boba Fett. And we got like 3 episodes where it was the Mandalorian season 2.5, and that was weird. Like that's strange to me. Like if you didn't watch Book of Boba Fett, you'd come into season 3 of Mandalorian being like, I don't know what happened here. I thought Grogu, you said, was,
doing his thing.
So.
What I also liked about your book, and this probably goes back to your artists, so you can give credit where credit's due on this.
Absolutely.
When I see a lot of indie books, it tends to be that the hero and the main bad guy and the heroine and all that, they get the love. You know what I'm saying? They're
Right.
getting the full court press. I just want to add this page in. Check out some of the facial details of these guys, 1, 2, and 3 here.
Yeah.
Who's your artist who's actually put some attention to detail here to give these characters some life? It's not. This doesn't just happen here. This happens throughout the book.
Yeah.
These secondary characters get a lot of love.
Do you know what the most amazing experience is as a writer is seeing the pages come in?
Yeah.
And I remember this. I was at my girlfriend at the time. We were hanging out in her. I mean, she was a master's student, so it wasn't a dorm room, but it was in a college town, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on her computer, and I got the email from him, and the amount of detail Dan would put in. And this was not necessarily in the script. I just, I would write like outside the WMBU studios,
Mm-hmm.
and he would put that scene, and he would write, and you draw it, and you get that you're like, wow, this is so much better than I imagined it. Like, and it's almost it's a throwaway, it's establishing shot. That's all it is, right? It's a throwaway, like here, the scene is now here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for him to kind of flesh that out, and then to have the tension back and forth between, all the different characters here. And just again, the way he fleshed out the studio, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what a studio should look like. I didn't put those details in.
Mm.
It just was, they're about to enter the studio. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, oh man, he like, you could have just put a door that said studio, right? And he has it there. But instead he opens it up, and it's like, oh yeah, these people are like, they're rehearsing the scripts, and they're going through the shot footage, and there's the cameras, and it's like, oh man, like you're making me look good by you looking good. So it absolutely, I will absolutely praise Dan, because he is the one that puts these details in. The next trade that's going to come out in is it August, July, August, September. So in September, it's Sire Revelations,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the next series in the book. Dan actually at that time had gotten a job doing Return to Wonderland, so he had to leave the book. We got another artist, Jose Holder, who now works for Netflix. I got blessed with just ridiculously talented guys. Same thing. These pages would come in, and he'd put all these details in that weren't in the script, but I would just, you write it, but you also get to be a fan, and that's kind of the way. That's the way I kind of view it. So getting your pages in is it's an amazing experience, and this is a great example of that.
Were you ever? Because I always think writers, especially when you're a creator of the book and the character as you are,
Sure.
Tend to be mini editors.
Yeah.
Just because it's like my baby sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Do you ever find that, having worked with lots of different companies, you tend to then become a little bit, I'm not going to say take over Ted, that's too nasty a word, but you get a little bit like, oh well, or do you just sort of like give free rein and just chill out?
It depends on what the situation is too, right? So I'm like I said, I work with this company called Rogue Matter. They're a new digital comic book company out in LA, and we're working on a project that's co-financed by a production company. So I'm working with this incredibly talented writer, Victoria Rao, who I met through Zenescope, and we became friends, and we've always wanted to work on a project together. So we're working on this one, and again, it'll be out later next year or early 2024, whatever the case is. And we both talk about this though. Like, look, at the end of the day, we're here to deliver a script for these guys, right? Like, we're here to deliver what they want us to do. Versus the Sire, where it's like, no, this is just, and that's why it's so much fun to come back to this character, because I get to call every shot. I have a very high level in my head of professionalism, what it's supposed to look like. I really, it's yes, I'm blessed with really great artists, but at the same time, I'm not going to settle for artists that are not, of a professional quality. But at the end of the day too, I get to call the shots, and I get to say, no, this works. This is exactly what I want to have happen. This is what I want, this scene to look like. And, and so, yeah, so it just depends on the situation. But I will tell you, being an indie publisher where you get to call your own shots, and then working freelance, work for hire, can sometimes be a challenge, because you're just used to the good life. You're used to, but at the same time, it's got some pros to it also, where, the more someone digs in, the more notes they give you, the more that it always seems to elevate you as well too as a writer. So, give or take both ways.
We're going to have a look at your website and also Dren Public Productions in a minute. But you've
Sure.
mentioned them a couple of times, and I am a little bit intrigued. So
Sure.
please forgive me to digress just to touch on this. You've mentioned Zenescope a couple of times. Now,
Sure.
Zenescope has a bit of a reputation.
Sure.
But I will say right now, I have a soft spot for Zenescope books.
Yeah.
Van Helsing is currently on my pull list at
Great.
the local.
Pat Shan's a great writer. He's a lot of what he did. I think he's back in the book, right?
Yeah, I interviewed Pat Shan a few years back.
Yeah.
That said, there are some elements, the sort of like the quest element of like Grim Fairy Tales, for example, where it just seems quest after quest. It just doesn't. How long can that keep going? But then they do the Grim Tales of Terror every quarterly, and that's fun. What's it like working for a company like Zenescope, where you kind of have to, well, maybe you don't have to, maybe you can tell me, but there's the public perception versus the perception of what you're doing in the trenches. Because Zenescope obviously must enjoy what they're doing, or else they wouldn't do it. It's simple as that. Yeah. But then I find it really hard to actually walk into a comic book shop in the UK and pick up a Zenescope book. Not because everyone looks at me and goes, "Oh, look at them buying that book." It's because they don't stock it.
Yeah. So what's really funny is so Raven Gregory, who poached Dan for me. I don't say poached. I mean Dan and I was trying to
just call it like it is. Stole.
Well, you know what stealing would mean that I was paying Dan. I like really when it came back
he rescued him, liberated him.
I mean, look, Dan and I, when we first started, we both had day jobs. I worked at Wizard. He worked at a medical company cleaning medical supply, like medical things. It was a terrible job for him. And I said to him, I said, look, I'm going to do my best. I work at Wizard, so I'm going to get you as much publicity as possible. I'm going to put your name on the map. And to this day, and you can ask him too, and friends, I did exactly that. I definitely did what was promised. That being said, when I told him, I said, look, if we make money, I'll split it with you. And then at shows, I'll split it with you also. And I did, so it was a lot of like, hey, we just sold we sold 1,000 copies of Sire #1 at Wizard World Chicago. I mean, 1,000, like that's crazy. And so he did get paid from that, but he wasn't a regular gig. I couldn't pay him for a regular gig. And so Raven, ended up rescuing him, like you said, and getting him a paid gig at Zenescope. But then Raven also said, look, I like the book, The Sire. Why don't you pitch? Because Raven was one of the editors at Zenescope. He was the one finding new talent. And I said, okay. And I saw Zenescope at all the shows. They had the booth babes and, they really leaned into it. There were fairy tale stuff. And I said, all right, it was for Grimm Fairy Tales. I wrote 2 issues of that, plus Grimm's Tales of Terror, about 10 years later. And I had the same perception. I'm like, oh boy, there's a lot of TNA. All right, so I actually went in the comic book store and I bought a whole bunch of Zenescope books to read them, and so I'd get a feel for what was happening. And I was shocked when I would open the page, no TNA on the inside, solid storytelling, and I was like, oh, that completely blew. It was complete night and day. I was like, oh, they're selling, sexy covers to sell books, but they're hooking you with their universe and what they've managed to do. I mean, they've been in business for, it's got to be almost 20 years now. 2005, 2004.
Tell you what, a couple more years, they'll be on the Old Timers show.
Oh, exactly, right?
The Granny Tales of Terror.
Yeah, so I got to tell you, I applaud them. Ralph and Joe, they have always been nothing but straightforward with me, with everything. They published one of my creator-owned books called The Mainstream. It was co-created by Sire cover artist Talon Caldwell and I, who's a good friend of mine now. And again, I met him through Sire. I met him by commissioning him to do the covers for me, and we became friends. So, we ended up doing that, and they were always, look, this is their page rate. Okay, I understood what I'm getting into. It's not, unless I could, unless I'm writing a bunch of their books, I'm not quitting my day job. But at the same time, I'm getting paid. Zenescope was the first professional paycheck I ever got for writing comics, and so I'm forever grateful to that. I really am.
I sometimes think they get a bit of a bad press because of you're absolutely right. The covers have that curvy appeal, and then you open
Look,
it
that's
up.
what Dren
Yeah.
Productions' whole business model
Yeah.
is sexy covers. I mean,
Yeah.
it just it is.
And that's fine. I do find, so for me, Robin Hood works really well for them.
Yeah.
Van Helsing works really well.
Mm-hmm.
Belle, the Beast Hunter, doesn't work so well. But it's each their own, right? Each their own. And I'll always say this to anybody: if you don't like a book, just don't buy it. Simple
Exactly.
as. Don't buy it. Sorry,
Yeah.
my local accent came out there. Don't buy it, then go complain about it when you've bought it. You know, just how do you not know what you buy anyway? That's
I know.
all right, let's talk about you some more. Because
Sure.
boom, this is your website, Sire Studios.
Correct.
Where is my screen? There it is. Comics podcast. You do a podcast. Are we in competition? Oh no.
I doubt it. Well, we're on hiatus now too, so that's a good thing. But yeah, no, I do. So Secrets of the Sire was the podcast that I launched in 2016. So my career is kind of an interesting one too. There is a gap where I really wasn't putting much stuff out because I just couldn't get stuff published. Jim Valentino scaled back on on everything he was publishing. And those are the new issues of Sire, by the way. So like I said, there's 11, 12, and 13. You know, and so he was my outlet into Image. I never connected into Image Central with the confidence to just start pitching Image Central some books. And so there was a time where I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do here. And I started a radio show / podcast back in 2016 called Secrets of the Sire. And with the express goal of, let me reach out to all my publishing contacts, invite them on the show, remind them that I'm around, remind them I'm a writer. And it worked because I had Zenoscope on, and I got a couple freelance gigs out of that. You know, a few months later, and I pitched them the mainstream, and we got it on there. So,
it's there it is.
Yeah. So it's it worked, and in the process of doing it with the sole purpose of trying to get more comic book work, the podcast itself was doing really well. We came out and we started live streaming when Facebook Live first happened. Facebook would just give us video views. Like, they would direct everyone to us. We didn't have to do anything. We'd get 2,500 video views every single week we came out with something. And so, at one point, History Channel sponsored us, which was pretty cool. And it was enough to put us on the map to where Rogue Matter, which again is a digital company I'm working with out in LA, they bought us, and we renamed the show to the Rogue Wave Podcast. And we're on hiatus right now until we're gearing up for a big marketing launch. So podcasting this is kind of before podcasts were like everyone knows what a podcast is now. 2016, you heard of podcasts, you knew what podcasts were, but it was more niche than anything else, and just happened to get in at a good time, and it did. It reignited everything. I've been working steadily now, both on the Sire, both on Dren Productions, but through Zenoscope, through Rogue Matter, and through a couple other things as well too now, ever since. So it did its job.
Cool. So are you telling me that Dren Publishing uses the Zenoscope curvy girl model, great storyline?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I would definitely, I'd say it is no more evident than Flesh Eating Cheerleaders from Outer Space. That is the flagship book there, and it's exactly what it is. It's a B movie 50s title book. It's got beautiful women. It's got men as well too, if you're into that. So but it's a cool sci-fi. It's a throwback sci-fi story. James, the creator of that book, he's built such an empire now on Kickstarter. I mean, he has built a consistent fan base through Kickstarter through his books. And he also does some role-playing games. I have a book through them called Epicenter. It's a sci-fi horror book. It's about a guy who accidentally he's a Cold War experiment that was forgotten about, and he accidentally erupts one day and so now it's basically about a guy who it takes place from the girlfriend's point of view and everything like that, and we just moved Sire over there because we've been partnering up for so many years now. I think people just would understand that it was part of Dren, and we're in Diamond, and I couldn't be more happy.
Yeah, so very good, very, very good. I can see where the Zetascope taste is coming into that, so that's
Sure.
cool. That's cool.
It works. And this is the thing. We've put out comics where we don't do that, right? James
people
has put out a
complain.
couple books. And Flesh Eating Cheerleaders from Outer Space makes $30,000 an issue on Kickstarter, and these other books make $3,000. And one has TNA on it and one doesn't.
Yeah,
so
it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. As I said, if you don't
Yeah.
want it, don't buy it. Simple as. Not
Yeah.
hard to work out. So here we go. We talked about it previously. This is the Previews World page. So if you go to Preview Worlds, type in Sire, you can find this. It's your top of your Google search. The code is there at the top of that page. I'll read it again. It's APR, so Alpha Papa Romeo 231404. Get that to your local comic book shop, or you could just go to their website direct and buy it from there. I noticed on your website you can buy digitally as well as hard copies. That's a bit of a godsend for someone like me stuck in the
Sure.
UK, because as much as I love, I say this all the time, as much as I love chipping in for indie books or Kickstarters, I can tip the $5 by no problem, but then I have to pay $25 to get it shipped over. It makes it cost prohibitive. So
Yep.
look,
we are not scared of digital at all. They're DRM-free PDFs. I mean, look, pirating exists whether we like it or not. Most people that support you understand that artists got to eat and artists got to make a living. So
let me put it to you like this, because this is the first time we've chatted. I write comic reviews for Comic Crusaders, our sister site, which launched all our pods. And if I review a book, an indie book, and I like it, do you know what I do?
Buy it.
Yeah, go out and buy it. Simple as. That's exactly what I do. Because I think to myself, I could keep the review copy and it's sat on my hard drive.
Sure.
But I could. But no, I'm a comic book fan. I like holding the damn book in my hand, right? So things like Lovesick from Image that I'm reading at the minute,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
that Fight Girls from AWA a while ago, all random stuff from indie publishers that I have to go hunt for, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I go out and get them because they've intrigued me enough to go out and buy them. Casual Fling, all these sort of books that you think, and my wife will look at me and go, "I thought you liked Batman." I'm like, "Well, yeah, everyone loves Batman." Yeah, but come on, man. Right, to find out more information and keep up to date with everything that's going on, there is some socials there. I'll put them there. So you've got Twitter at Sire Studios. Give me 2 seconds. I've got my Twitter open. I think I actually do. I also follow you already? I'm not quite sure.
Oh, I hope so. Great.
Sire Studios.
Sire_Studios. It's the only one. There's some guy who has Sire Studios on Twitter, and he hasn't tweeted since 2009, but he's still got the username. And I'm never getting that one back.
Yeah, there you are. Follow. So there you go. That's you followed.
Fantastic.
Sorry. Instagram, you've got at Sire Studios. Facebook, you've got two. You've got Sire Studios and you've got Dren Productions. All there for all the up-to-date information. What more?
Thank you so much.
What more could you want? You know what, Michael? It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, sir. You're an absolute interesting conversation.
Have me back. We can go in. Boy, I can talk.
Consider that. Let's pencil that in, because this has been an absolute blast. I've had such a good time. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
For spending the time. Don't forget to check out the UCPN for all your favorite shows. You saw the advert for it earlier, the Old Timers Comic Book Show, and of course we've talked a bit about Marvel. So No Price Podcast for everything that has your Marvel, Disney Plus, MCU stuff on. No, I still haven't seen Ant-Man movie. No, I'm not going to watch it, so don't watch it if you want my opinion on that. Thank you. And of course, TDC, the Definitive Crusade, for everything that's DC. There you go. What more could you want? Michael, it's been a blast. Thank you so much. Good luck for the book. I'm sure it'll do fantastically well.
I hope so. The time is right for it. That's for sure.
For sure. Right. And for everybody else, I have been your host, Johnny Machine Hughes. So, adios.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.com, all about comic pop culture.